small American town bustled with its usual morning activity as Jessica wiped down the counters at Joe's coffee shop. She glanced out the window, observing the familiar faces passing by. Mr. Johnson, the local banker, hurried past with his briefcase. Sarah, the florist, arranged bouquets in her shop window across the street. It was the same routine every day, and Jessica couldn't help but feel a twinge of restlessness. As she refilled the sugar containers, Jessica's mind wandered to the art classes she'd taken in high school. She remembered the thrill of creating something new, the feeling of endless possibilities. Now, at 25, those dreams seemed distant, replaced by the monotony of serving coffee and making small talk with regulars. The bell above the door chimed, snapping Jessica back to reality. She looked up, expecting to see another familiar face, but instead, her eyes fell on a disheveled old man she'd never seen before. His clothes were worn and patched, his beard unkempt, but his eyes sparkled with an unexpected vitality. "Good morning," Jessica greeted him, her customer service smile firmly in place. "What can I get for you today?" The old man shuffled to the counter, fishing in his pockets for loose change. "Just a small black coffee, if you please," he said, his voice rough but warm. As Jessica prepared his order, she couldn't help but notice the man studying her intently. When she handed him the coffee, he smiled. "You've got an artist's hands," he said matter-of-factly. Jessica blinked in surprise. "I used to paint," she admitted. The old man nodded sagely. "The world needs more beauty. You should pick up those brushes again." From that day on, the old man, who introduced himself as Harold, became a regular at the coffee shop. He'd come in every morning, order his small black coffee, and sit at the corner table, observing the comings and goings of the town. As the days passed, Jessica found herself drawn to Harold. Unlike the other regulars who discussed weather and local gossip, Harold had a wealth of stories about art, travel, and life experiences that seemed far beyond his current circumstances. One quiet afternoon, as Jessica wiped down tables near Harold's usual spot, he began to tell her about his youth in New York City. "I was a painter," he said, his eyes distant with memory. The city was alive with creativity in those days. Every street corner had a story. Every face was a masterpiece waiting to be captured on canvas. Jessica listened, enthralled, as Harold described the vibrant art scene of his younger years. He spoke of famous artists he'd met, of gallery openings and late-night discussions about the nature of beauty and truth. His words painted pictures in Jessica's mind, awakening a long-dormant part of her that longed to create. As the weeks went by, Jessica found herself looking forward to Harold's visits. She began to share her own dreams with him, her desire to travel, to see the world through an artist's eyes. Harold listened with genuine interest, offering encouragement and advice. Their friendship deepened, and soon they began meeting outside of the coffee shop. On her days off, Jessica would find Harold at the local park, feeding pigeons and sketching passers-by with a stubby pencil on scraps of paper. She brought him sandwiches and sat with him, soaking in his stories and wisdom. Despite his appearance and circumstances, Harold never asked Jessica for money or favors. Instead, he seemed intent on giving, sharing his knowledge, his experiences, and his unwavering belief in Jessica's potential. As summer turned to fall, Jessica and Harold's park meetings became a regular occurrence. She found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else. Harold listened without judgment, offering insights that often left Jessica pondering long after their conversations ended. One crisp autumn day, as they sat on their usual bench, Harold turned to Jessica with a serious expression. "Promise me something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me you won't let your dreams fade away like I did." "The world needs your art, Jessica. It needs your vision." Jessica felt a lump form in her throat. She nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, she realized how much Harold's friendship had come to mean to her. and how it was slowly but surely changing her perspective on life. On a particularly chilly afternoon, Harold's mood seemed more somber than usual. Jessica sat beside him on their park bench, quietly sipping her coffee. After a long silence, Harold began to speak, his voice tinged with a mixture of nostalgia and regret. "I never told you about Clara, did I?" he asked, his eyes fixed on a distant point. Jessica shook her head, sensing that Harold was about to share something significant. Harold took a deep breath and began his tale. "Clara was the love of my life," he said. "We met at an art gallery opening in New York, back when I was just starting to make a name for myself as a painter. She was a dancer, all grace and fire." As Harold spoke, Jessica could almost see the scenes he described: the bustling art scene of 1960s New York, the passionate romance between a painter and a dancer. Harold's words painted a vivid picture of late nights in smoky jazz clubs, sun-drenched mornings in a tiny apartment filled with canvases and ballet shoes, and the heady excitement of two young artists in love. "We were going to conquer the world together," Harold continued, a wistful smile playing on his lips. "My paintings, her choreography, we had such grand plans." But as Harold's story unfolded, the smile faded from his face. He described how his early success led to more prestigious commissions, how the pressure to produce and conform to others' expectations began to weigh on him. "I started drinking," he admitted. "At first it was just to take the edge off at social events, but soon I couldn't face the canvas without a bottle by my side." Jessica listened intently, her heart aching for the young Harold and Clara. She could see where the story was heading, but she remained silent, allowing Harold to share at his own pace. "Clara tried to help me," Harold said, his voice cracking slightly. "She begged me to get sober, to remember why we fell in love with art in the first place. But I was too far gone, too stubborn. I pushed her away, told her I didn't need her or anyone else." The pain in Harold's voice was palpable as he described the night Clara finally left. "She said she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. I woke up the next morning, hungover and alone, and realized what I'd done. But by then, it was too late. She was gone." Harold fell silent for a moment, lost in his memories. Jessica tentatively placed her hand on his arm, offering silent support. "After that, I couldn't bring myself to paint anymore," Harold continued. "Every brushstroke reminded me of Clara, of what I'd lost. So I walked away from everything, my career, my friends, my entire life. I've been running ever since." As Harold's story came to an end, Jessica found herself deeply moved. She thought about her own dreams, her own fears of failure and loss. Harold's tale served as both a cautionary story and a reminder of the power of love and art. In the days that followed, Jessica couldn't shake Harold's story from her mind. She found herself picking up her old sketchbook, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The charcoal felt familiar in her hands as she began to draw, inspired by Harold's words and her own reawakened passion. Her first sketches were rough, uncertain, but as she continued, something shifted. She began to see the world around her with new eyes, noticing details she'd overlooked before: the play of light on the coffee shop windows, the subtle expressions on customers' faces, the graceful arc of a pigeon's wing in flight. Jessica's drawings evolved, becoming more complex and emotive. She found herself staying up late into the night, lost in the creative process. Her small apartment slowly filled with sketches and paintings, each one a testament to her rediscovered passion. One afternoon, as Harold sipped his coffee at his usual table, Jessica hesitantly showed him some of her work. His eyes lit up as he carefully examined each piece. "This is it, Jessica," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "This is what I was talking about. You've got a gift, a real gift." Encouraged by Harold's words, Jessica began to dream bigger. She researched local art classes and community college courses, determined to hone her skills. She even started to entertain the idea of submitting her work to small local galleries. As Jessica's artistic journey progressed, she noticed a change in Harold as well. He seemed more animated, more engaged. He began to share more stories from his past, offering advice and encouragement. It was as if Jessica's rekindled passion had awakened something in him too. However, just as things seemed to be looking up, Jessica noticed Harold's health beginning to decline. He came to the coffee shop less frequently, and when he did, he seemed more frail and tired. Despite her gentle prodding, Harold brushed off her concerns, insisting he was fine. One particularly cold morning, Harold arrived at the coffee shop looking pale and shaky. As Jessica handed him his usual coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. "Harold, please," she pleaded. "You need to see a doctor. This isn't just a cold." Harold smiled wearily, patting her hand. "Don't you worry about me, Jessica. I've weathered worse storms than this. Just promise me you'll keep painting, no matter what happens." As Harold shuffled out of the coffee shop, Jessica couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Little did she know, her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The news of Harold's death hit Jessica like a physical blow. She received the call on a quiet Tuesday morning, just as she was preparing to open the coffee shop. The local hospital informed her that Harold had been brought in the night before, suffering from severe pneumonia. Despite their best efforts, he had passed away in the early hours of the morning. Jessica moved through the following days in a daze. She had known Harold for less than a year, yet his absence left a gaping hole in her life. The coffee shop felt emptier without his presence, the park bench where they often sat together now painfully vacant. As she grappled with her grief, Jessica was surprised to learn that she was listed as Harold's emergency contact. It seemed that in their short time together, she had become the closest thing to family he had in this small town. The funeral was a small, somber affair. Jessica had worried that few people would attend, given Harold's reclusive nature. However, she was surprised to see a modest gathering at the local cemetery. As she looked around, she recognized faces from town. The librarian who often chatted with Harold, the park groundskeeper who would save yesterday's bread for him to feed the pigeons, even a few regulars from the coffee shop who had grown fond of the old man's presence. As people shared their memories of Harold, Jessica began to realize the impact he had made on the community, even in his humble circumstances. The librarian spoke of Harold's vast knowledge of art history and his gentle encouragement of her own artistic endeavors. The groundskeeper recalled Harold's kindness and how he always had a wise word to share. Jessica listened, her heart both heavy with loss and warmed by these testimonies. When it came her turn to speak, she found herself at a loss for words. How could she encapsulate the profound effect Harold had had on her life in just a few sentences? In the end, she simply thanked him for believing in her and promised to honor his memory by pursuing her art. As the small crowd dispersed, Jessica lingered by the freshly covered grave. She placed a single sketch on top, a drawing of Harold sitting on their park bench, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom and humor she had come to cherish. Just as she was about to leave, a man in a suit approached her. He introduced himself as Mr. Tompkins, a local lawyer. "Miss Jessica," he said, his tone formal yet kind, "I need to speak with you regarding Mr. Harold's estate." Jessica blinked in confusion. Estate? As far as she knew, Harold had no possessions beyond the clothes on his back and a few personal items. Mr. Tompkins handed her an envelope. "Harold left explicit instructions that this was to be given to you after his passing. I suggest you read it in private." Still bewildered, Jessica took the envelope home. Sitting at her small kitchen table, she carefully opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, written in Harold's familiar scrawl. "My dear Jessica, if you're reading this, then I'm afraid our time together has come to an end. But don't be sad for me. I've lived a long life, filled with both joy and regret. Meeting you in my final years was a gift I never expected, but will forever cherish. You brought light back into my life, reminded me of the power of art and human connection. Your kindness and your talent have inspired me more than you know. I have a confession to make. The homeless man you knew was not the whole truth of who I am, or rather, who I was. In my youth, before I lost my way, I achieved considerable success as an artist. The paintings I created during that time have, over the years, become quite valuable. I've lived simply these past decades out of choice, a self-imposed penance for my past mistakes. But now, I want to right those wrongs in the only way I know how. Jessica, I am leaving everything to you, my entire estate, including all my remaining artworks and the proceeds from their sales over the years. It's more money than you might imagine. Use it wisely. Pursue your dreams, create beautiful things, and never lose sight of what truly matters in life. You have a gift, Jessica. Don't let it slip away as I once did. With deepest affection and gratitude, Harold. Jessica read the letter once, twice, 3 times, her mind struggling to comprehend its contents. She looked up, her small apartment suddenly feeling foreign, as the weight of Harold's final gift settled upon her. A mixture of emotions washed over her: grief, shock, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. As the reality of her situation began to sink in, Jessica realized that her life had irrevocably changed. Harold's legacy was now in her hands, and with it, a chance to transform her life in ways she had never imagined possible. The question was, what would she do with this unexpected fortune, and how could she truly honor Harold's memory? In the days following Harold's funeral, Jessica found herself grappling with the enormity of her inheritance. Mr. Tompkins, the lawyer, had provided her with the details of Harold's estate. The sum was staggering: millions of dollars in liquid assets, plus a collection of Harold's early works that were conservatively valued at several million more. Jessica's small apartment, once a cozy refuge, now felt suffocating as she tried to come to terms with her new reality. She spent hours pacing, her mind racing with possibilities and doubts. The money could change everything. She could quit her job at the coffee shop, travel the world, study art at the best schools, open her own gallery. But with these exciting prospects came a deep sense of responsibility and uncertainty. One evening, as she sat surrounded by sketches and half-finished paintings, Jessica found herself caught in a moral quandary. On one hand, she could use the money to fulfill her own dreams, the very dreams Harold had encouraged her to pursue. She could see the world, immerse herself in art, and become the artist she had always longed to be. On the other hand, she felt a strong urge to use the money in a way that would honor Harold's memory more directly. Perhaps she could set up a foundation in his name, supporting aspiring artists who, like her, needed a helping hand to pursue their passion. Or maybe she could use the funds to address issues of homelessness and mental health in their community, inspired by the struggles Harold had faced. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on Jessica. She found herself wishing she could talk to Harold one more time, to ask for his guidance. In an attempt to feel closer to him, she decided to visit his old haunts in town. Her journey led her to Harold's tiny rented room on the outskirts of town. Mr. Tompkins had given her the key, explaining that Harold had kept this space even during his years of apparent homelessness. As Jessica stepped into the cramped, sparsely furnished room, she was struck by its simplicity. A single bed, a rickety desk, and a small bookshelf were the only furniture. But what caught Jessica's eye were the walls. They were covered with sketches, notes, and photographs. It was like stepping into Harold's mind. As she explored the room, Jessica's eyes fell on an old, leather-bound book tucked away on the shelf. Curious, she pulled it out and realized it was a journal. With a mixture of trepidation and anticipation, she opened it. The journal was filled with Harold's distinctive handwriting, accompanied by quick sketches and doodles. As Jessica began to read, she found herself immersed in Harold's inner world. The entries spanned decades, chronicling his journey from celebrated young artist to a man grappling with addiction and loss. Harold's words painted a vivid picture of his struggles. He wrote of his deep regret over pushing Clara away, of the paralyzing fear of failure that had driven him to drink, and of the shame that had kept him from reclaiming his old life, even after he had gotten sober. But among the pain and regret, there were also moments of profound beauty and insight. Harold described the peace he found in observing the world around him, the joy of connecting with people without the trappings of fame or success. He wrote about rediscovering his love for art through the simple act of sketching on scraps of paper. As Jessica delved deeper into the journal, she came across entries from the past year, the period when he had known her. She was moved to tears as she read Harold's thoughts about their friendship. He wrote about how her kindness and passion had rekindled his hope, how watching her rediscover her love for art had brought him a sense of redemption. In one of the final entries, Harold had written, "In Jessica, I see the artist I once was, full of dreams and potential. But more than that, I see the person I wish I had become, someone who creates not for fame or acclaim, but out of genuine love and a desire to bring beauty into the world. My greatest hope is that she will learn from my mistakes and forge a path that stays true to her heart." Jessica closed the journal, her mind reeling from what she had read. She felt as though she had been given a precious gift, a deeper understanding of Harold and the lessons he had learned throughout his life. As she sat in Harold's room, surrounded by the remnants of his life, Jessica began to feel a sense of clarity. The path forward was still uncertain, but she now had a better understanding of the responsibility she bore. Harold's legacy wasn't just about the money. It was about the wisdom he had gained, the lessons he had learned, and the hope he had placed in her. With this new perspective, Jessica realized that her decision wasn't just about what to do with the money. It was about how to live her life in a way that would honor Harold's memory and the trust he had placed in her. As she left the room, locking the door behind her, Jessica felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that whatever path she chose, it would be guided by the insights she had gained from Harold's life and the transformation he had inspired in her own. In the weeks that followed her discovery of Harold's journal, Jessica found herself drawn to the idea of organizing an exhibition of his work. She envisioned it as a way to share Harold's art with the world while also honoring his memory and the impact he had on their small community. With a sense of purpose, Jessica threw herself into the planning. She reached out to local galleries, researched art curation, and began the painstaking process of cataloging Harold's works. As she delved deeper into his art, she was struck by the evolution of his style over the years, from the bold, confident strokes of his early career to the more introspective, nuanced pieces from his later years. Determined to make the exhibition a community event, Jessica started reaching out to people in town who had known Harold. She was surprised by how many people had stories to share. The owner of the local diner recalled how Harold would sketch on napkins in exchange for meals. The librarian remembered long conversations about art history and philosophy. As word of the exhibition spread, Jessica found herself having more profound conversations with townspeople than she ever had before. Many opened up about their own experiences with love, loss, and unfulfilled dreams. She heard stories of high school sweethearts who drifted apart, of artistic passions abandoned for more practical pursuits, of regrets and what-ifs. One afternoon, as Jessica was hanging posters for the exhibition in the town square, she was approached by Mr. Jennings, the owner of the hardware store. "I heard about what you're doing for old Harold," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "You know, I always thought he was just another bum. Shows what I know." Jessica smiled, encouraging him to continue. Mr. Jennings sighed, looking off into the distance. "I had dreams once, you know. Wanted to be a sculptor, but life got in the way. Bills to pay, family to support. Seeing what Harold did, what he left behind, it makes a man wonder." As she listened to Mr. Jennings and others like him, Jessica began to realize that the exhibition could be more than just a showcase of Harold's work. It could be a catalyst for the community, a chance for people to reconnect with their own forgotten dreams and aspirations. However, not everyone in town was supportive of Jessica's efforts. As she worked on securing a venue for the exhibition, she encountered resistance from some community members. Mrs. Blackwell, a prominent member of the town council, cornered Jessica after a meeting. "Now, dear," Mrs. Blackwell said, her voice sickly sweet, "I understand you've come into quite a bit of money recently. Don't you think there are better ways to use it than on some vagrant scribblings? Our community center is in desperate need of repairs, and the school could use new computers." Jessica was taken aback by Mrs. Blackwell's directness. She tried to explain the importance of the exhibition, but Mrs. Blackwell cut her off. "I'm just saying, there are people in this town who have worked hard all their lives. They deserve that money more than some paintings." As she walked away from the encounter, Jessica felt a mix of anger and uncertainty. She understood the town had needs, but she also believed in the power of art to transform lives. Hadn't Harold shown her that? The idea that some people viewed Harold's legacy as nothing more than a sum of money to be distributed left her feeling frustrated and misunderstood. Over the next few days, Jessica noticed whispers and pointed looks as she walked through town. It seemed that news of her inheritance had spread, along with opinions on how she should use it. Some people, like Mr. Jennings, were supportive of her plans for the exhibition. Others, like Mrs. Blackwell, seemed to think they had a say in how Harold's money should be spent. The pressure began to weigh on Jessica. She found herself second-guessing her decisions, wondering if she was being selfish by focusing on the exhibition. The doubts crept in during quiet moments. Was she really honoring Harold's memory, or was she just using his legacy to fulfill her own artistic ambitions? One evening, as she sat in her apartment surrounded by Harold's sketches and her own half-finished paintings, Jessica felt overwhelmed by the responsibility she had taken on. She picked up Harold's journal, flipping through the pages until she found an entry that had struck her before. Art isn't just about the final product hanging on a wall. It's about the process, the way it changes the artist and those who experience it. True art has the power to make us see the world differently, to challenge our assumptions and open our hearts. Reading Harold's words, Jessica felt a renewed sense of conviction. She realized that by sharing Harold's art and story with the community, she wasn't just honoring his memory, she was continuing his work. Harold had changed her life by believing in her and encouraging her to pursue her passion. Now, through this exhibition, she had the chance to do the same for others. With this realization, Jessica's determination solidified. She would move forward with the exhibition, not despite the challenges and resistance, but because of them. She understood now that the true value of Harold's legacy wasn't in the money he left behind, but in the potential to inspire and transform, just as he had inspired and transformed her. As Jessica continued her preparations for the exhibition, she found herself delving deeper into Harold's past. She pored over his journal entries, pieced together fragments of his life from the stories shared by townspeople, and studied his artwork with an increasingly discerning eye. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a missing piece to Harold's story. One sunny afternoon, as Jessica was arranging some of Harold's earlier works in the small gallery she had rented for the exhibition, an elderly woman walked in. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and despite her advanced age, she carried herself with a dancer's grace. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice soft but clear. "I heard there was going to be an exhibition of Harold's work." Jessica turned, a welcoming smile on her face. "Yes, that's right. I'm Jessica. I'm organizing the exhibition. Did you know Harold?" The woman's eyes misted over as she gazed at the paintings on the wall. "You could say that," she replied. "I'm Clara." Jessica froze, her heart skipping a beat. Clara, the love of Harold's life, the woman he had never stopped loving. She was here, in the flesh, standing amidst the very artwork that had been inspired by their love story. "Clara," Jessica breathed, unable to hide her astonishment. "Harold, he told me about you. Please, come in. Would you like some tea?" Over the next hour, Clara shared her side of the story with Jessica. She spoke of the whirlwind romance she and Harold had shared in their youth, the dreams they had built together, and the heartbreak of watching Harold spiral into addiction. "Leaving him was the hardest thing I've ever done," Clara confessed, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. "But I couldn't stand by and watch him destroy himself. I always hoped he'd find his way back." As Clara spoke, Jessica began to see Harold in a new light. The pain and regret that had colored his journal entries took on new depth. She realized that Harold's journey, his fall from grace and his eventual peace with a simpler life, was even more complex than she had imagined. "Did you know he was here all this time?" Jessica asked gently. Clara shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "No, I had no idea. I moved back to town a few years ago, after my husband passed away. To think we were so close all this time." Jessica listened, her heart aching for the love story that had been left unfinished. She found herself sharing with Clara how Harold had impacted her own life, how he had encouraged her to pursue her art and believe in herself. As they talked, Clara's eyes kept drifting to the paintings on the wall. "He never lost his touch," she murmured, her gaze lingering on a particularly striking landscape. "I always knew he had greatness in him." Before she left, Clara turned to Jessica with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for doing this, for sharing Harold's work with the world. And thank you for being there for him when I couldn't be." After Clara's departure, Jessica sat alone in the gallery, surrounded by Harold's artwork. She felt as if she had been entrusted with not just Harold's legacy, but with the final chapter of a love story that had spanned decades. The weight of this responsibility settled on her shoulders, but instead of feeling burdened, she felt inspired. In the days that followed, Jessica threw herself into the exhibition with renewed vigor. She rearranged the artwork, drawing connections between pieces that she now understood in a new context. She wrote descriptions that hinted at the depth of emotion behind each brushstroke, each color choice. As the opening day of the exhibition approached, Jessica found herself facing a moral dilemma. Should she share Harold and Clara's story with the public? On one hand, it was a beautiful, poignant tale that added depth to Harold's work. On the other hand, it felt intensely personal, almost invasive to share without Clara's explicit permission. After much deliberation, Jessica decided to reach out to Clara. Over coffee at the local diner, she broached the subject gently. "Clara," she began, "your story, yours and Harold's, it's beautiful and heartbreaking. I think it adds so much meaning to his work. Would you be comfortable with me sharing some of it at the exhibition?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as she stirred her coffee. Finally, she looked up at Jessica, a mix of sadness and resolution in her gaze. "You know," she said slowly, "for years I've carried this story inside me, like a secret too precious or too painful to share. But maybe it's time to let it out into the world. If it helps people understand Harold's art, understand him, then yes, I think that would be fitting." As Clara spoke, Jessica felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She realized that in her quest to honor Harold's memory, she had become part of something much larger than herself. She was now a keeper of stories, a bridge between past and present, between art and life. With Clara's blessing, Jessica began to weave their love story into the narrative of the exhibition. As she worked, she felt as if Harold was guiding her hand, helping her find the perfect words to complement his art. The night before the exhibition opening, Jessica stood alone in the gallery, surrounded by Harold's life's work. She felt a profound sense of connection to Harold, to Clara, to the community that had shaped them all. As she turned off the lights and locked the door, she whispered a quiet thank you to Harold, wherever he might be, for entrusting her with his legacy. The day of the exhibition's opening arrived with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. Jessica woke early, her mind racing with last-minute details and concerns. As she made her way to the gallery, she couldn't help but feel that this day marked a significant turning point, not just for her, but for the entire community. Jessica had decided to make the exhibition a day-long event, with the formal opening scheduled for the evening. As she unlocked the gallery doors in the morning, she was surprised to see Clara waiting outside, a gentle smile on her face. "I thought you might need some help," Clara said, her eyes twinkling. "And truthfully, I wanted to spend some more time with Harold's work before everyone else arrives." Grateful for the company and support, Jessica welcomed Clara inside. Together, they spent the morning making final adjustments to the displays, Clara occasionally sharing anecdotes about specific pieces or the periods of Harold's life they represented. As the day progressed, curious townspeople began to trickle in. Jessica had advertised the exhibition as a chance to experience Harold's art and learn about the man behind the familiar figure they had seen on their streets. Many came out of curiosity, some out of respect for Harold's memory, and others drawn by the controversy that had been brewing in town over Jessica's inheritance. Mr. Jennings from the hardware store arrived early, his usual gruff demeanor softened by obvious emotion as he stood before a series of Harold's early sculptures. "I never knew he could do this," he murmured, more to himself than to Jessica. "Makes a man wonder about the talents hidden in the people we pass by every day." As more people arrived, Jessica found herself constantly moving, answering questions, sharing stories, and watching as the townspeople engaged with Harold's art in ways she had hoped but hadn't dared to expect. She overheard snippets of conversations, people discussing their own abandoned dreams, reflecting on the nature of success and failure, contemplating the role of art in their lives. Clara, for her part, became an unexpected center of attention. As word spread about her identity and her history with Harold, people gathered around her, eager to hear more about the man they thought they had known. Clara shared her stories with grace and honesty, her words bringing Harold's journey to life in a way that complemented and enhanced the visual narrative of his artwork. As the afternoon wore on, Jessica noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The initial curiosity and skepticism were giving way to something deeper, a sense of community, of shared experience. People who had been vocal critics of the exhibition, including Mrs. Blackwell, were now engaged in thoughtful discussions about the themes in Harold's work. Jessica's heart swelled as she watched a group of teenagers huddled around one of Harold's later pieces, an abstract representation of hope and renewal. She overheard one of them say, "Maybe I shouldn't give up on my music after all. If this guy could make all this after everything he went through." As the time for the formal opening approached, Jessica felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had prepared a speech, but standing in the midst of this transformed community, she wondered if her planned words would be enough to capture the magic of what was unfolding. The gallery was packed by the time Jessica stepped up to make her opening remarks. She looked out at the sea of faces, familiar townspeople, art enthusiasts from neighboring cities who had heard about the exhibition, even a few reporters from regional papers. Her eyes found Clara's, and the older woman gave her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Jessica began to speak. She talked about Harold, not just as an artist, but as a friend, a mentor, a man who had lost everything and yet had found a way to keep creating beauty. She spoke about the power of second chances, of the importance of seeing the humanity in every person we encounter. Harold's story, she said, her voice strong with emotion, is not just about art. It's about resilience, about the transformative power of love and forgiveness, both for ourselves and for others. Each piece in this exhibition is a testament to the idea that it's never too late to rediscover our passion, to make a difference, to connect with others. As Jessica concluded her speech, she was met with a moment of profound silence, followed by a wave of applause that seemed to shake the very walls of the gallery. People were wiping tears from their eyes, embracing their neighbors, looking at the artwork around them with new appreciation. In that moment, Jessica realized that the exhibition had become something far greater than she had initially envisioned. It wasn't just a showcase of Harold's talent or a memorial to his life. It had become a catalyst for change, a spark igniting long-dormant dreams and fostering a renewed sense of community. As the formal part of the evening wound down and people continued to mill about the gallery, Jessica found a quiet moment to slip away. She stood in a corner, overwhelmed by the impact of what she had helped create. Clara approached her, gently placing a hand on her arm. "You've done a wonderful thing here, Jessica," Clara said softly. "Harold would be proud. You've given his art a new life, and in doing so, you've touched so many lives." Jessica smiled through her tears, feeling a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. She knew that this was just the beginning, that Harold's legacy and the ripples it was creating in their community would continue to spread in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As the exhibition entered its final week, the impact on the community continued to grow. The small gallery had become a hub of activity, drawing visitors from neighboring towns and even a few from the city. Local schools organized field trips, bringing students to experience Harold's art and learn about his extraordinary life story. On a particularly busy Saturday afternoon, Jessica stood near the entrance, greeting visitors and answering questions. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she watched people engage with the artwork, their faces reflecting a range of emotions from wonder to introspection. Clara had become a regular presence at the exhibition, often sharing stories with visitors and providing insights into Harold's creative process. Today, she sat in a comfortable chair in the corner, surrounded by a small group of enthralled listeners. As Jessica made her way through the crowd, she overheard snippets of conversations that made her heart swell. "I've lived here all my life, and I never knew we had such talent in our midst," an elderly man remarked to his companion. "Mom, can I take art classes? I want to learn to paint like this." A young girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, eyes wide with excitement. "You know, I've been thinking about picking up my old guitar again," a middle-aged man confided to his friend. "Seeing all this, it makes me wonder what I could create if I just gave it a shot." As the afternoon wore on, Jessica noticed a commotion near the entrance. A group of people had gathered, their voices rising with excitement. Curious, she made her way over to see what was happening. To her surprise, she saw Mr. Thompson, Harold's lawyer, standing in the center of the group. He was holding what appeared to be an old, weathered sketchbook. "Jessica," Mr. Thompson called out when he spotted her. "I'm so glad you're here. You won't believe what I found." As the crowd parted to let her through, Mr. Thompson held out the sketchbook. "I was going through some of Harold's old legal documents," he explained, "and I found this tucked away in a folder. I think you need to see it." With trembling hands, Jessica took the sketchbook. As she opened it, she gasped. The pages were filled with rough sketches and detailed drawings, studies for paintings, portraits of people she recognized from town, and landscapes that captured the essence of their small community. But what caught her eye were the dates. These sketches were recent. many of them from the past year, during the time she had known Harold. "He never stopped creating," Jessica whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Even when he had nothing, he was still an artist." As word spread about the discovery, people gathered around, eager to catch a glimpse of Harold's hidden works. Jessica carefully turned the pages, revealing sketch after sketch. There were studies of the park where he and Jessica had spent so many afternoons, quick portraits of regulars from the coffee shop, even a rough self-portrait that captured Harold's weathered face with stark honesty. Clara made her way through the crowd, her eyes wide with wonder. When she saw the sketchbook, she let out a soft gasp. "Oh, Harold," she murmured, gently touching one of the pages. "You never lost your gift." As Jessica continued to flip through the pages, she came across a sketch that made her heart skip a beat. It was a drawing of her, sitting at the park bench, her face tilted up towards the sun. The lines were simple but captured her essence perfectly. The hope in her eyes, the slight smile on her lips. Below the sketch, Harold had written, "Jessica, a reminder that it's never too late to begin again." Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes as she stared at the drawing. She felt as if Harold was speaking to her directly, reaffirming the faith he had placed in her. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, drawing Jessica's attention back to him. "There's more," he said, his voice serious. "I found a letter with the sketchbook. It's addressed to you, Jessica." He handed her an envelope, slightly yellowed with age. With shaking hands, Jessica opened it and began to read aloud. "Dear Jessica, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer around, and you've discovered this old sketchbook of mine. I want you to know that meeting you rekindled something in me that I thought was long dead, the joy of creating, of seeing the world through an artist's eyes. You might wonder why I kept these sketches hidden. The truth is, I was afraid of hoping again, of believing that I could still be an artist after all these years. But watching you rediscover your passion gave me the courage to pick up my pencil again. These sketches are my gift to you, not just the physical pages, but the lesson they represent. It's never too late to start again, to see the beauty in the world around us and try to capture it. You have a rare gift, Jessica, not just your talent, but your ability to see the best in people, to inspire others to reach for their dreams. Use that gift. Share it with the world. Thank you for being my friend, for reminding an old man that there's always beauty to be found, even in the most unexpected places. With all my gratitude, Harold." As Jessica finished reading, she looked up to see that there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The letter in the sketchbook had added a powerful, personal dimension to the exhibition, transforming it from a retrospective of a talented artist to a testament of resilience, friendship, and the enduring power of creativity. In that moment, surrounded by Harold's art both old and new, and by a community that had been transformed by his story, Jessica felt a profound sense of purpose. She knew that her journey, the one that Harold had set her on, was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. As the exhibition entered its final days, the atmosphere in the gallery was electric, with a mixture of excitement and bittersweet nostalgia. The discovery of Harold's sketchbook and letter had breathed new life into the event, drawing even more visitors and media attention. On the penultimate day of the exhibition, Jessica arrived early to find a small crowd already gathered outside the gallery. Among them was Clara, looking elegant as always, but with an air of nervous anticipation about her. "Jessica, dear," Clara said as she approached, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have shared earlier, but I wasn't sure how." Intrigued, Jessica led Clara to a quiet corner of the gallery. Clara took a deep breath before speaking. "A few years ago, before I moved back to town, I received a letter," Clara began, her voice trembling slightly. "It was from Harold, He had tracked down my address somehow. In the letter, he apologized for everything, told me he had gotten sober, and he asked if we could meet. Jessica listened, her heart racing. "What happened?" she asked gently. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared of reopening old wounds, scared of what I might feel if I saw him again. So I never responded. I always told myself I'd write back someday, but I kept putting it off. And then, when I finally moved back here and learned he had passed away, Her voice trailed off, choked with emotion. Jessica placed a comforting hand on Clara's arm, encouraging her to continue. "I've carried that regret ever since," Clara finished. "If I had known he was here, if I had just been brave enough to respond." As Clara's revelation sank in, Jessica felt a mix of emotions: sadness for the missed opportunity, understanding of Clara's fear, and a deeper appreciation for the complexity of Harold's journey. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the gallery entrance. Jessica looked up to see a familiar face making its way through the crowd. It was Mr. Simmons, Harold's old friend from his New York days, who had attended the opening night. "Jessica," Mr. Simmons called out, waving an envelope. "I found something you need to see." As Mr. Simmons approached, Jessica noticed he looked both excited and slightly sheepish. "I was going through some old boxes in my attic," he explained, "and I found this. It's a letter from Harold, written years ago. I'm ashamed to say I never opened it, but after seeing the exhibition, learning about Harold's journey, I finally did." With trembling hands, Jessica took the envelope. She looked at Clara, who nodded encouragingly, and then carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Harold's familiar handwriting. "Dear James, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been meaning to write for years, but shame and fear have held me back. I owe you an apology for the way I treated you, for the way I treated everyone when I was in the grip of my addiction. I want you to know that I'm sober now. It's been a long, hard road, but I'm finally at peace with myself. I found a quiet life in a small town, far from the art world we once knew. Sometimes I think about reaching out, trying to reconnect with our old circle, but the truth is, I'm afraid. Afraid of rejection, afraid of stirring up old pain." There's an envelope with this letter. Inside is a sketch, a portrait of you from memory. Consider it a peace offering, a small token of the gratitude I feel for the friendship we once shared. I don't expect a response, but know that you and all the others I left behind are often in my thoughts. Your old friend, Harold. As Jessica finished reading, she looked up to see Mr. Simmons wiping tears from his eyes. "I had no idea," he said softly. "All these years I thought he'd just abandoned us all without a second thought." The revelation of these two letters, one sent but unanswered, one written but never sent, added yet another layer of poignancy to Harold's story. They spoke of regret, of missed connections, but also of the enduring power of love and friendship, even in the face of years of separation. As word spread through the gallery about these new discoveries, people gathered around, eager to hear more. Jessica found herself at the center of an impromptu storytelling session, sharing the contents of both letters with the captivated audience. Among the listeners, Jessica noticed faces from all walks of life: art enthusiasts, local residents, even some of the initial skeptics who had questioned the value of the exhibition. She saw tears, heard gasps of surprise, and witnessed moments of quiet reflection as people absorbed the new information. One elderly gentleman, his voice choked with emotion, spoke up. "You know, I've lived in this town for 60 years. I saw Harold every day, thought I knew who he was. But this exhibition, these letters, they've shown me how little we really know about the people around us. How many stories are we missing just because we don't take the time to look deeper?" His words seemed to resonate with the crowd. Jessica saw nods of agreement, heard murmurs of assent. She realized that Harold's story had become more than just a tale of one man's life and art. It had become a mirror in which the community saw reflections of their own missed connections, unexplored talents, and hidden depths. As the day wore on, Jessica noticed people lingering longer in front of the artworks, studying them with new eyes. Conversations sparked up between strangers, sharing personal stories inspired by Harold's journey. The gallery hummed with an energy of connection and introspection. Standing amidst it all, Jessica felt a profound sense of purpose. She realized that the true power of art and of Harold's legacy lay not just in the objects created, but in their ability to bridge gaps between people, to inspire reflection, and to nurture empathy. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the gallery windows, Jessica knew that tomorrow's closing day would be more than just an end. It would be a beginning, for her, for Clara, for their community, and for all those touched by Harold's story. The question that lingered in her mind was, where would this journey take them next? The final day of the exhibition dawned bright and clear. Jessica arrived at the gallery early, her mind swirling with emotions and plans for the future. As she unlocked the doors, she was surprised to see a small group already waiting outside. Familiar faces from the community, each holding something in their hands. "We have something to show you," said Mrs. Peterson, the local librarian, stepping forward. After hearing about Harold's hidden sketches in those letters, well, it got us thinking. One by one, they approached Jessica, presenting her with an array of items: old sketches, poems scribbled on napkins, half-finished short stories, even a few small sculptures. Each piece was accompanied by a story of dreams deferred, of creative passion set aside in the face of life's demands. "We thought, maybe, if you're interested, we could do something with these," Mr. Jennings said gruffly, holding out a beautiful hand-carved wooden box. "Not saying we're artists like Harold or anything, but..." Jessica felt tears welling up in her eyes as she realized what was happening. Harold's story had sparked something in the community, a renaissance of forgotten dreams, a rekindling of creative spirits long thought extinguished. As the day progressed, more people arrived, many bringing their own creations or mementos of abandoned passions. The gallery, already full of Harold's work, began to transform into a living, growing testament to the creative spirit of the entire community. Midway through the afternoon, Clara arrived, looking flustered but excited. "Jessica," she called out, making her way through the crowd. "I found something big." In her hands, Clara held an old, battered envelope. "It was hidden in a book Harold had given me years ago," she explained breathlessly. "I never opened it, until now." With trembling hands, Jessica carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, dated just a few weeks before Harold's passing. "My dearest Clara, by the time you read this, I may no longer be here. I've asked a friend to ensure this letter finds its way to you after I'm gone. I want you to know that you have been the constant star in the sky of my life. Even in my darkest moments, the memory of your love guided me towards the light. I never reached out again after my failed attempt years ago because I felt I didn't deserve your forgiveness. But I realize now that by keeping my distance, I denied us both the chance for closure, for healing. I've left something for you with my lawyer, a painting I've worked on in secret for years. It's my masterpiece, not because of any artistic merit, but because it encapsulates everything you meant to me, everything I wished I could have been for you. I hope that when you see it, you'll understand that my love for you never diminished, that you were my muse and my inspiration even when we were apart. Forgive me, Clara, for my weaknesses, for the pain I caused you, and know that in my final years, I found peace, thanks in no small part to the strength your memory gave me. With eternal love, Harold." As Jessica finished reading, she looked up to see Clara weeping openly, years of pent-up emotion finally finding release. The gallery had fallen silent, the weight of Harold's words hanging in the air. Mr. Thompson, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "I think it's time," he said softly, nodding to his assistant, who wheeled in a large, covered canvas. With reverent care, Mr. Thompson unveiled the painting. A collective gasp filled the room. The canvas revealed a stunning portrait of Clara as she had been in her youth, dancing amidst a swirling backdrop of vibrant colors and abstract forms. But looking closer, one could see that the background was composed of hundreds of tiny scenes, moments from Harold and Clara's life together, and scenes from the town that had become Harold's final home. It was a masterpiece that bridged Harold's early artistic brilliance with the wisdom and perspective he had gained in his later years. More than that, it was a visual love letter, a testament to a love that had endured despite separation and hardship. Clara stood transfixed before the painting, her hand over her heart. "Oh, Harold," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The revelation of this final piece of Harold's legacy seemed to crystallize everything the exhibition had come to represent. The power of art to express the inexpressible, the enduring nature of love, the possibility of redemption, and the profound impact one person could have on an entire community. As the day drew to a close, Jessica found herself standing before Harold's masterpiece, surrounded by the impromptu displays of community artwork. She felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see Mr. Thompson. "Jessica," he said, his voice serious, "there's one final piece of Harold's will we need to discuss. He left instructions about what should happen to his art after the exhibition." Jessica listened intently as Mr. Thompson explained Harold's last wishes. As the lawyer's words sank in, she felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, responsibility, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. Looking around at the transformed gallery, at the faces of her neighbors newly alight with creative passion, at Clara standing serenely before Harold's final gift, Jessica knew that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Harold's legacy, she realized, wasn't just his art or even his story. It was the spark he had ignited in this community, the dormant dreams he had awakened, the connections he had posthumously forged. And now, it was up to her to nurture that spark, to help it grow into a blazing beacon of creativity and human connection. As the sun set on the final day of the exhibition, casting a warm glow over Harold's masterpiece, Jessica felt a profound sense of clarity. She knew what she had to do next. With a deep breath, she turned to address the gathered crowd, ready to share Harold's final surprise and to take the first step into a future bright with possibility.